The US has come a long and prominent way to become the most influential country in the world. The country had to participate in various wars, which did not always end in victory, but left a significant trace in history. The world started to see the USA as a separate state when the War of Independence had begun. 13 British colonies rebelled against the British Empire. The mid-70s of the 18th century marked the beginning of the war. Americans' desire for gaining independence, as well as Britain's tax reforms, led to a clash with the British Empire's regular army. 6 years of constant war did not bring results. The turning point occurred only in the early 1780s. Troops under the command of George Washington gained a significant victory at the Battle of Yorktown. The defeat of the opposite side was significant enough for the other British garrisons to surrender, and the United States gained independence under the Treaty of Paris. The symbol of the 13 colonies, in the form of stripes, is still on the flag of the United States as a memory of the struggle and the price of democracy. The peace between the former colony and the imperialist did not last long. The next conflict between the US and the British Empire occurred in the tens of the 19th century. While Europe was at war with Napoleon, the US planned to increase its influence on its continent, including territories belonging to Britain. The British Empire began attacking warships and US ports. The conflict proceeded with moderate success. The United States won several battles, and the British Empire won some too. Neither country achieved its goal, so 3 years later, the British Empire and the United States signed the Treaty of Ghent with a cessation of hostilities. The next major conflict on the continent occurred with Mexico, which had recently gained independence from the Spanish crown. This was called the Mexican-American War. The cause of the conflict was the territories that both young states claimed. The Mexican attack on Fort Brown in Texas became the pretext for the war. The first significant clash occurred after the first fire commenced on the fort. The Americans returned the attack with their guns, and a few days later, the first land skirmish occurred at the Battle of Palo Alto, in which the Americans defeated the Mexicans. Mexico called it an intervention. The Mexican National Army was supported by the Whig Party, which included Abraham Lincoln. However, the Whigs did not prevent the United States Congress from declaring war on Mexico. After 10 days, Mexico declared war in return. The Americans were winning battle after battle. The revolutionary tactics, salvo artillery firing, helped them a lot. The Mexicans failed to seize the initiative and began to lay down their weapons after the capture of Mexico City. The conflict ended with an unconditional victory of the United States, with the annexation of the territories of Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and several other states. The U.S. paid $18 million to Mexico. Total U.S. casualties were 13,000 killed and 4,000 injured or maimed. The Mexican government publishes a total of about 25,000. As a result, Mexico lost half of its territory. While this was an important step for America in terms of territory and influence, for Mexico it was a disgraceful defeat, which led to tensions between the countries that have continued hitherto. The United States also survived the Civil War. The conflict occurred between the North, led by the government of President Abraham Lincoln, and the South, the so-called Confederacy, led by Jefferson Davis. The split between the states was due to a failure of negotiation over slavery in the country. Totally dependent on black slaves, the agrarian South opposed the abolition of slavery in the country, while the industrial North already had a working system and was not interested in slaves. There was also disagreement over the Constitution and the way power should be perceived. Also, there was widespread dissatisfaction with previous presidents in the South. 13 states seceded, but Abraham Lincoln refused to recognize the Confederacy as a separate state and started a war. The first 2 years of the war were unevenly successful. During the Civil War, the Canon Obusier de 12, also known as Canon de l'Empereur or Napoleon, gained massive use. The turning points of the war are the most famous key battles. For example, the Battle of Antietam, in which the army of Major General George McClellan met the Confederate army of General Robert Lee. Although the losses on both sides were conditionally equal, and the battle turned out to be a relative draw, the South lost the initiative. With the signing of the decree and the abolition of slavery in the North, motivated black citizens began joining the U.S. Army. At the same time, the industrially underdeveloped South has begun to feel the scarcity of medicines and weapons. Although the Confederacy succeeded in the Battle of Chancellorsville, Virginia, within a few months the South was defeated at the Battle of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. On the first day, the Confederate Army was able to strike and advance, but 2 days later, the lack of awareness turned into a disaster. The losses of the rivals were roughly equal again, but the South did not expect such losses and could no longer advance, so Robert Lee's army had to retreat. As a result, Atlanta, Georgia, and Richmond, Virginia fell in the autumn of the following year, and the Confederacy began to lay down its arms. The war was notorious for the death of over 600,000 people, with U.S. alone expenditures of an enormous $3 billion at the time. Having gained a lot of power, the U.S. decided that it was time to expand its trade and political interests. The United States, which has long been interested in Cuba, has repeatedly offered to buy it from Spain, but has always been politely refused. However, in the late 19th century, in Cuba and other colonies of Spain, revolts for independence began to erupt. Spain was able to suppress rebellions, but this ended with famine and epidemics. This became the reason the U.S. intervened, and then, led by William McKinley, declared war on Spain. 3 days later, Spain severed diplomatic relations with the United States and declared a war of retaliation. The American fleet, led by George Dewey, defeated the Spanish fleet off the Philippines, starting the Philippine-American War, known alternatively as the Philippine Insurrection, led by Emilio Aguinaldo. On the island of Puerto Rico, the American infantry seized power almost without resistance. In Cuba, however, the situation was more difficult. Although Spain was able to defeat the United States in the first clash, the Battle of Santiago de Cuba, the legendary General Theodore Roosevelt, who later became the U.S. president, took an active part in the battle. The conflict led to the signing of the Treaty of Paris, in which Spain lost Cuba and Puerto Rico. The Philippines were sold to the U.S. for $20 million. The total casualties on both sides were 72,000, mostly Spanish. However, more than 90% of the dead died not from bullets, but from epidemics. Despite its economic ties with Europe, the U.S. remained neutral during the first half of World War I. Interventions were limited to the sale of weapons, ammunition, medicines, and loans. As a result, the Entente's debt obligations reached an insane $10 billion. Although society was divided, most Americans supported non-interference. However, after the sinking of the British passenger liner Lusitania, on which more than 1,000 civilians, including American citizens, by German submarine U-20, the preparedness movement emerged. It insisted on the U.S. entry into the war. However, from a technical point of view, the American Army was not prepared for direct intervention. Only after 2 years of preparations did American President Woodrow Wilson declare war on Germany and other Triple Alliance members, and decided to join the Entente. Germany appealed for assistance to Mexico with a promise to recover territories lost during the American-Mexican War and to provide substantial financial assistance. However, the instability of the situation in Mexico itself prevented it from entering the war. Only in the summer of 1917 did the first American troops arrive in France. However, it was the U.S. that played an important role in the war. The revolution emerged in the Russian Empire, one of the Entente's members. The Emperor Nicholas II and his brother abdicated the crown. The new government signed a peace treaty with Germany, agreed to pay reparations, and gave up some territories. Without the U.S., France and Britain would be doomed. Despite the aggressive activities of the German submarines, hundreds of thousands of American soldiers arrived in France every month from the United States to help hold the line. However, the Western Front did not move in either direction. All attempts to move forward for both sides ended with only human losses. In the final year of the war, the combined forces of the United States, Britain, and France, under the command of General John Pershing, were able to launch the Battle of Saint-Mihiel in northeastern France. The battle involved the use of 17 combined American-French divisions, trained by Lieutenant Colonel George Patton, as well as an enormous number of aircraft. It resulted in the largest air battle of World War I. Good preparation and a swift attack in September 1918 deprived the Germans and their allies of a chance to withdraw. The success of this operation made it possible to take the next step and launch the Meuse-Argonne offensive. The number of American troops in France has already increased to 2 million. The absence of tanks and anti-tank defense made the position of the German army even worse. The astonishing success of the Entente and its new ally had left German soldiers and sailors distrustful of their emperor. More and more demands were made to end the war. The Autumn Offensive was the last in the First World War. The Entente and the United States de-occupied territories of France and Belgium. This resulted into the November Revolution in the German Empire and the overthrow of the monarchy led by Kaiser Wilhelm II. The new government began to form a republic and signed an act of surrender. The Meuse-Argonne battle is still listed in U.S. history as the most colossal in terms of the number of soldiers involved. In total, more than 160,000 U.S. soldiers died in this war, and more than 200,000 were injured or maimed. But the political goal was achieved, and the U.S. has already become a superpower. You will discover the continuation of the history of U.S. military campaigns in the second part of this video. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell not to miss it.